Welcome everybody to our webinar today. We will get started reasonably quickly. I'd just like to say a big thank you. I see some clients on here and some partners of ours and some new faces. So welcome to the webinar. We're really pleased to put this on for you today, and hopefully we'll be doing a series of these over the next year or so if they're of value to people. So feedback after the webinar will be absolutely fantastic for us if you could supply it when you receive any emails that we send out after the event. So I will quickly hand over very soon to Tanmoy, who's our Chief Operating Officer at Bob's Business. He'll be taking you through the main body of the webinar. And then about halfway through, we've got a Q&A session with Dave Pearce from Wigan Council, who'll be talking about how he's developed culture change within his organisation for cyber. So just a quick thing on Bob's Business. There's a few things on the screen there, when we were founded and how many businesses that we've worked for. But ultimately, we're a business that operate in the cyber awareness space. And our mission is to effectively help any organisation, whether it be big or small, to develop and embed a cybersecurity culture within their organisation. And the main thing for us is for that to be very empowering for your staff, enjoyable, and ultimately it needs to be effective for reducing risk. So Tammo, I'd like to hand over to you, and we will get started. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the introduction, Neil. So yeah, as Neil said, I'm the CTO of Bob's Business, and thank you all for joining. And we'll dive straight in. So when it comes to culture change, the first thing that we need to really consider is why you should even consider integrating cybersecurity into your corporate culture. And to understand that, the first thing is to understand the reason why and the problem that we're trying to solve. And that problem is that 90% of breaches start with human error. And by utilizing culture change, we're promoting and maintaining positive habits instead of just kind of sending out training for the sake of it and trying to tick the box. So what does that culture change look like? And that is to take a completely different view of processes and procedures with a non-punitive approach and positive engagements. So instead of punishing people for not doing things, we're trying to maintain a positive atmosphere around the topic of cybersecurity and embedding that positivity into your organization. We also need to ensure that the entire organization, every single employee, understands why we're actually delivering this campaign and why they need to do this cybersecurity awareness stuff. And that can also relate back to those employees personally, because if you as an individual understand that actually these aren't just things that I need to do for work, but are things that are going to benefit me in my personal life, using my personal devices, then I think that's really important and powerful for the individual, and will really get your employees on board. Effectively, what we're trying to develop is a bit of a cyber highway code. So oftentimes when it comes to behaviors like wearing a seatbelt or looking both ways before you cross the road, these days, that's become so ingrained in our society that you don't even think twice about these actions. They're just things that you automatically do and inherently do without even thinking. And it's those types of, we effectively want to apply that type of inherent psychology to cybersecurity. So the types of checks that you might make on emails, suspicious emails when they come in, we want that to be an almost automatic behavior. So, as I said, it kind of needs to be an organization-wide buy-in when it comes to rolling out cybersecurity culture change. And obviously, this kind of has to start from the very top level. So your top senior executives and your managers must be on board when it comes to the process, the products that you're going to use, the technologies you're going to use, and also why you're engaging in this. That's quite an obvious one, as those people tend to be the ones who are in control of the financing and the resourcing as well. But a section that a lot of people tend to forget about is the middle management. And so that's giving line managers an understanding that they actually have a role to play as well here, and that they need to champion positive cybersecurity behaviors. I'll give some examples of that later on in the presentation. And also furthering the engagement. Maybe they could be the ones who are talking to their particular teams about cybersecurity and why they need to do the training. And if you give them the ability to do that and the understanding to do that, then it can be really powerful as it trickles down throughout your organization. And then, as I mentioned earlier as well, it's about ensuring all employees know why we're actually engaging in this campaign at every step of the journey and relating that back to the personal lives. Naturally, when it comes to something like cybersecurity awareness, a lot of people will object to this. So whether that's to do with simulated phishing, whether that's to do with too much learning being sent out, you will end up with objections in some form. And the key here is to actually speak to those opposers directly and give them examples of real world events and advantages that this engagement is going to have, and how you're taking this positive approach instead of punishing them for not engaging or not doing a particular action. So in terms of the journey and developing a plan to effectively embed that cybersecurity culture change, the first thing we really need to do is understand what those strengths and weaknesses are within a given organization. And so we might do that by developing a risk profile. And off the back of that, you then need to plan out how you're going to approach each of those weaknesses over the next period of time. And so you might do that by drip feeding e-learning, partaking in phishing simulations, developing communications, sending out communications. And by doing all of these things in conjunction, you'll be able to reduce those risks over time. And then the next step really is to assess the impact and assess your new level of risk. Some things might have improved, some things might have gotten worse, but this is just a continuous cycle of improvement. And by going through this process continuously, over time, you'll find that your organization has reduced those risks, and you'll have a quantifiable and demonstrable metrics to show that that has taken place. And one of the hardest things in this industry really is to show that return on investment, especially at the top level. And this would give you a structure towards doing that. So in terms of assessing and understanding your current risk, so you can either utilize something from a provider or build something yourself, some kind of assessment tool. And effectively, there are three main things that you need to assess. The first one is the basics of cybersecurity knowledge themselves. The second one is the behaviors that your employees are engaging in. And then the third one, and it kind of ties in with the second one, is around your specific company policies. So for instance, if you have policies around not using removable media, for instance, how many people actually have tried to use removable media? Is that something that you could check from some logs, or is that something you could ask the question? So every single assessed aspect that we're looking at here needs to be summarized, ideally in a measurable way. So you can see there, for example, 50% of people are currently using work emails for personal services, and that goes against a policy. So ideally, we want to reduce that number over time. And by measuring things in this way and giving a specific and measurable statistic, over time, we can show that there has been an impact with the training and awareness campaign, and that we have managed to build that culture of cybersecurity. So that brings us on to our first poll, which is, what is the biggest risk to your organization? I'm going to give you about 20 or 30 seconds to put your votes in. So if you click on the little shapes in the bottom right, You should have the ability to vote in this poll. There is no right or wrong answer in any of these polls. It's mainly just to gauge your understanding and your thoughts of what's specific to your organization. So yeah, I'll give you 20 seconds to go through that. Cool. So looking at those results, there's quite a spread here actually. But it seems like by far and away, you all feel, well, a majority of you feel like phishing is the biggest risk to your organization, including the likes of smishing and phishing. Whereas the others, we've got nothing for lack of software controls or insider threat, a couple of people around policies and lack of awareness, and then a couple of votes also for use of outdated software. Neil, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the risk when it comes to phishing.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point actually. Look, phishing continues. I hate to use the statistic about 90% of human error because it's banded around and has been for years, but that doesn't seem to change. And then 90% of that human error risk is also most breaches are 90% caused by some sort of phishing attack, which is interesting. The prompt there is around insider threat. It's a little bit of a red herring because insider threat sounds like it's somebody doing something maliciously, but actually most insider threat is actually people making mistakes. So in many ways it's a red herring because probably insider threat is the risk of a lack of awareness and therefore why people are clicking on things. So yeah, it continues to be most pertinent. I think during, again, I hate to talk about COVID continuously. Again, something that's been saturated completely, but 18 million emails were being stopped by Google on a daily basis in relation to COVID in the UK alone at one point. So people are continuously using phishing as a way to get into organisations, particularly spear phishing for large organisations, particularly, and it continues to be very prevalent. And fortunately, industry out there at the minute is doing a lot more awareness around it, but exposing people to simulations and giving them a positive approach to that is been proven, if done correctly, to reduce that risk, and particularly around how you then action things after a phishing attack happens. Are people reporting things is particularly interesting metric that as any organization, if we're talking about doing a risk profile of your organization, it's really, really important to actually not try and do everything. To get cultural change, you have to do things. How do you eat an elephant? Bite by bite. Focus on those things that you can get the most traction early on, and then bolt on things as you go. And phishing is usually the number one thing to start with.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. So moving on to implementation. So how do you actually reduce these risks? As Neil said, don't try to bite off more than you can chew. But in terms of how we would approach it, the first step really is to find some good e-learning. And that might include a storytelling approach, which we found to be really effective, lots of interactivity, and also gamification. So just to give you an example of this, if you bear with me. This is our simulated phishing game. effectively. And it gives you a bit of I'm just going to kind of whistle stop tour through this, but it gives you a bit more of a safe simulated environment where you can go through and try out different kind of templates and see how you react and whether you engage in the correct behavior for each of them. So can you tell if it's legitimate? What should you do if it's illegitimate? And we also have a couple of examples of smishing and vishing in here. So if I just quickly run through these, you can see here we've got a Google Drive template, and in this case you have a few different options. So either you can click on the link because you think it's a legitimate link, or you can delete the email, reply to the email, archive the email, or report it as phishing. So in this case, hovering over the link, I can see that that's google-alerts.co.uk, which I don't think is a domain that Google would typically use, and therefore I would report that as phishing. And so just by making it a little bit more open-ended and giving you lots of these examples, at the end of this, you get a whole bunch of points based on whether you took the right behavior, whether you took a behavior kind of in between, or whether you took the wrong behavior at any given moment. And then you can compare and contrast your scores. And it just adds a little bit of an element of gamification in there. So heading back to the presentation, we would also recommend you do face-to-face kind of workshop sessions. And this is something that a lot of people will kind of just not do because they think it's too difficult, or no one will sign up, or they won't be able to find the time. But what we found is actually these face-to-face sessions, whether it's, webinars like we've got today, or tutorials, question and answer sessions, they're really effective because it gives your employees the chance to be involved and the chance to kind of have their say. And we also do things like masterclasses quite often, where you'll go through open source intelligence. And yeah, they tend to be really effective. But yeah, Neil, I don't know if you have anything to add on the face-to-face aspects.
So my background's a training background. I was head of awareness and culture for the UK government for 18 years and delivered over 6 million phishing simulations. And we did masterclasses, particularly to private office, cabinet office, and senior government officials. And yeah, nothing will ever replace face-to-face contact with your end users, your staff, your employees, whatever you choose to call them. But ultimately, it can be, depending on the size of your organization, a very expensive way of doing things. So that's why e-learning is so prevalent now. But 100% face-to-face is really important. But even if you're doing face-to-face, I think the storytelling approach is absolutely key for me from a psychological point of view. People don't remember generally facts and figures and stats, so you can bore people with loads of stats and they will forget them. Whereas stories, where it's ingrained in us to actually remember stories and case studies and things like that. In the awareness sphere that I worked in, particularly, we called it the fairy tale effect. Everybody remembers fairy tale stories from their childhood, but if you give somebody a stat a week ago, they've probably forgotten it, or not to go down the religious route, but the Jesus effect of stories from the Bible and things like that, people remember those because they've got a very clear beginning, middle, and end that people can remember, and they relate to them. So particularly with our e-learning, we try to follow a storytelling approach across both modules on a singular basis, and then across our 70 different modules that we have. It's almost like we call it a bit of a soap opera about Bob and his work colleagues and how he's trying to protect his organization from the bad guy, which is interestingly called Damien. Good reference there.
Awesome. And then, yeah, the third aspect naturally is phishing simulations, and we'll dive deeper into that later on in the presentation. So in terms of the next poll then, how much e-learning should I give to my employees per month? And again, this can vary based on organizations and how receptive your employees are to it. However, it'd be good to get an understanding of what you all think on this topic. And so I'll give you another 20 seconds to get your responses in. Cheers. Right, so it looks like the vast majority of you feel as though 30 minutes is a good amount of time. We've got a couple of votes at 60 and 90, and then also quite a significant portion saying 10 minutes per month. And so on my next slide, we talk about the actual micro-learning strategy and how you can amplify engagement. So in terms of engagement in general, it can't just be about delivering e-learning and that's it. It's not a one and done, because what you'll find is that most people, once they've done that piece of e-learning, will forget the content within it probably quite quickly. And so the ideal case here is to deliver some e-learning, but then also follow up with plenty of communications, make sure that people see lots of different provider offerings, and also vary the content and types of content that you send out. So you might send out things like articles, blogs, quizzes, games. You could even do the likes of escape rooms. And the reason for this is because actually throughout the month, if you focus on a particular topic, let's say it's passwords, you could go through and easily deliver, a blog on passwords and a quiz on passwords, and just by making it the topic of the month, it means that someone has the exposure to that and the tips around it. So one of them might be make sure that your password's a certain level of complexity, and they might see that messaging 5, 6, 10 plus times throughout that particular month, and that really helps it stick effectively. And so in terms of our strategy and what we would recommend, it's to use a micro learning strategy where you only do maybe 5 to 10 minutes a month of direct e-learning with a policy, and make sure that that policy is really integrated into the learning. So I mentioned there as well around passwords specifically. If you have a password policy, then the number of characters, for instance, should be within that particular piece of e-learning, because the more generic you make it, the more likely someone is to not get that message, because you haven't made it part of both aspects. And yeah, like I said, you need to be seeing that particular messaging multiple times. And we see this in marketing all the time, actually. But it's something that we also try to embed into our kind of engagement when it comes to the learning strategy. Neil, have you got anything you'd like to add around microlearning?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember if people are doing training once a year, that's not the worst thing ever. The worst thing ever is doing no training. Some people just avoid it completely. So, but micro learning is really the way forward, because it creates a hook. Goes back to the whole behavioral science thing from Fogg's behavioral method, which is that if you make something particularly hard for people to do, they're less likely to perform the action. Now, the action here is to give them and impart them the knowledge that you need for to reduce your risk. So the micro modules get really good buy-in because it makes it very simple for people to buy into it. The action that is required is very simplistic. They don't have to spend ages doing it, therefore they won't procrastinate over doing it. And ultimately, most organizations, particularly at the minute, are running so very, very lean that people just can't find time for e-learning other than, and I've seen it many a time, people doing them in their own time, or rushing through something on a Sunday because they've got their PDR on the Monday and they have to complete their mandatory training. So just removing those barriers to entry for the awareness makes things really easy for your staff to buy into it. They don't have to invest as much time into it, but ultimately very similar to what we said earlier, bite-sized. You can eat something in small chunks, and so they don't, even though you're going to give them the same amount of awareness training over a 12-month period, you are making the action really, really simplistic for them. And then another thing on that is, look, we're in a space where cybersecurity is moving a lot faster, and technology and risk is moving so much faster than human nature, that you could do a course once a year, and the day after that technology or a new risk has emerged, particularly something like AI has become very prevalent over the last few months. And you have to wait a year to update people on something. So it's an easy way to keep that content refreshed, current and on trend, and to lean into the fact that things are in the news so people can receive the training that's pertinent to the organization that you're delivering it to at that time.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah, so moving on to the communication side. So obviously we talked a little bit about, in order to amplify that engagement, we need to send out lots of communications. And one of the most important things here is to frame your communications always in the most positive light. So you can see on the right-hand side here, we've got an example. It says, well done, 74% of you reported the email. And that is a very different take on what we see a lot of the time from organizations, which might be, along the lines of 30% of you have clicked on this particular email when we've done this phishing simulation. This is a terrible result. We're going to have to do better next time, but please keep that in mind. And just by kind of flipping the script and turning it into, well done, actually 74% of you reported the email. Why don't you come and join us in making this organization a safer place to work? Then just by flipping that script, it puts a much more positive edge on the entire campaign. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that will all fit together as we go into the phishing section. But you can see on the left-hand side as well, we've got an example of what we recommend to our clients to send out prior to doing any kind of phishing campaign. So typically we would do a baseline exercise that's completely silent, but actually everything in between our baseline exercises is all about education. And so what a lot of providers will do is just, encourage you to send out and try and get as high of a click rate as possible. But actually the point of the exercise is to educate. And the way we do that is by getting buy-in from your actual employees as well. So this email on the left-hand side, you can see, says exactly that. And it says, this think before you click campaign is designed to be positive rather than punitive exercise. And it tells every single employee in your organization that actually, yes, we are doing phishing simulations and it will be a positive exercise. We're not going to take anything away from you. And it's not a problem if you click on any of these. It's just about education and helping you both at work and also in your personal lives, which we mentioned towards the bottom of that particular example piece of comms. And we will be sending around the slides and stuff after the presentation, so you will have access to that. So moving on to Cyber Awareness Month then. So for those of you who aren't aware, October is Cyber Awareness Month, and we actually have a whole host of free resources that you can use. Again, this will be sent around after, but when we talk about things like sending out communications and things like that, we almost template most of that stuff for you when you're a Bob's Business customer, but also even if you're not a Bob's Business customer, these are some completely free resources, email communications. We've got guides on phishing and onboarding and wallpapers you can utilize and blogs you can utilize in there. So all of that's completely free, and will be sent to you after this presentation. But But yeah, I thought I'd mention that as it's obviously Cyber Awareness Month. So we're moving on to a Q&A session with Dave Pearce, the CTO of Wigan Council, and I will hand over to Neil to manage that.
Excellent, thank you for that. And yeah, just a quick thank you to Dave for joining us. Dave's at Wigan Council. Dave, could you just do a little 30-second intro into who you are and what you do, please? We've got Dave on mute still, so hopefully he'll come off mute. There we go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Couldn't unlock the mute button. Yeah, no problem, guys. Yeah, so I'm Dave Pearce. I'm the Chief Technical Officer for Wigan Council. So I look after, we've got a managed service provider who provides quite a lot of our IT services. So I manage that relationship, plus technical strategy and overall responsibility for cybersecurity on our side.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Dave. Just a couple of questions we've got of note that we wanted to ask you is when did Wigan Council sort of start its cybersecurity journey?
Yeah, so I was thinking sort of back really in terms of the journey. Really, I've been in public sector now for just over 20 years, so I'm aging somewhat, and I think perhaps cybersecurity journey has always been around, but it's changed and morphed into different things over time. So I kind of remember the days, back a couple of decades ago, really, where cybersecurity was only about the technical side of things, so technical controls, tooling, and stuff like that. And a virus is something that one person once had on a floppy disk and got the binned it kind of thing. So that was kind of back in the day. I think over that time, particularly well into the last decade and even more, it's been that shift really where that journey's been joined by end users and all organisational staff, not just users, in terms of the impact and in terms of that piece.
Brilliant. And what sort of blockers, or what are the biggest blockers you've faced in delivering a strategy around cyber?
So I think the biggest one, probably some synergy with a lot on these as well, and some of which have already been mentioned. So I think it's demystifying really the technical side. So again, for quite some time, a lot of organisations have suffered with, if you've got a piece of paper and it's a printout, it's your responsibility. If you've got to file on a computer, it's somebody technical IT's responsibility. So it's that shift really in mindset of understanding what elements of IT is your responsibility or joint responsibility and what we can do for you. So I think it's demystifying stuff. So we've just signed up recently with Bob's business to deliver all our new cyber training. We've replaced an existing supply we had just simply because when we looked at the sort of collateral stuff, it was really, really good, and we thought that it would be a real benefit to the organisation and its approach, because I think cyber training can get out of date very quickly, not just with its style but its content. So that's the thing. What we're really sort of impressed with it helped really with making it more, if you like, personable to staff. We just seen the gamification element there, which we're going to be rolling out, which we're looking forward to. I think alongside ownership as well, it's that reluctance potentially to report, or that reluctance to sort of come forward really, because this might be a stupid question. Whereas we brought those barriers down now. There's often a stupid question in cybersecurity, and we want to make sure that we're approachable and that people approach us whether or not what they're reporting is genuinely an issue or not.
That's interesting, Dave. I certainly found in my government days that the curse of knowledge was a big problem, that people designing, training or awareness for end users tend to be from a technical role, and without trying to offend, sometimes technical people speak in a different language, or it's overly complicated, and it's really important to obviously simplify things for people. So how did you overcome some of those blockers that you had in place? Yeah,
so I think once we'd recognised that actually this is actually going to get bigger and bigger over time, it's one of those things that crept up, and then I think it was a seismic shift really when the National Cybersecurity Centre was set up, because there was a recognition at central government for the need of that, and the work that they've done has been fantastic. So even down to some of the infographic stuff, which is the softer side things, which are available by the NCSC site. but also, the stuff that you've incorporated as a result as well is massively, massively helpful. I think that the trouble is with cybersecurity is it's difficult sometimes not to use some of those buzzwords just simply because that's what they are and that's what they kind of mean. But I think by simple explanation of that and just giving people, if you like, exposure to these things via one way or another helps people get on board with the language and things like that. One of the things that has really helped is, and has got a level of maturity now, is we roll. So I chair a joint architecture group that meets roughly monthly. That looks at a number of things, but particularly all new software that's being proposed or introducing anything new into the organisation or a major upgrade, a migration to a vendor cloud or any of those kind of things. At the point where line of business applications are touched and done and actually gone through some transformation, we get together with all of our technical TDA staff, as well as myself and head of security from a managed service partner, and we support those end users. So we have an IT sponsor who brings that along with the end user, and we just make sure that we ask and maintain, if you like, the questions that get asked over to vendors around their security posture. Supply chain attacks obviously being something that people are obviously concerned with, but also just having a basic level, or at least an appropriate level of cybersecurity built into line of business applications. So since we've done that, we went from really not having a great lot to do to actually being inundated with people wanting to come, just simply because we're approachable. It's not about saying no, it's about finding the way to say yes. And that way we've uncovered, if you like, more and more, and the amnesty around, bring your apps sort of to the table kind of thing, because a lot of these are also partner apps that we don't necessarily commission. So I think the area of line of business applications in particular is really key, certainly for local authorities, just because of the vast services that they deliver, and thus that means you end up with a vast sort of portfolio. And just really the other bit is just get that accountability at all sides. Just like you said, I think you said previously, it's kind of everybody's sort of problem is let's pull together as an organisation to sort of work through it.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dave, because most people would know cybersecurity is a three-pronged approach, isn't it? It's technology, process, and people working in harmony, and that human risk stat is so high because it's the people working with the technology and the processes that are causing the errors. It's not that it's their fault, it's just maybe they're not educated so well. And it's quite interesting from a lot of conversations we have is about when it comes to the training side of things, most budgets are set to buy technology or invest in processes. And the awareness ends up being, and training ends up being sort of the last thing on the list, even though it's considered to be almost the biggest risk. So how did you, what was your tip for getting, would your tip be for getting buy-in for something like that?
So I think there's been a couple of things. So there's obviously been some big cases reported even on national news of other local authorities who unfortunately have been targeted over the years. So there's that element. I think also as well as you get alerts from some local partners and stuff that might have been caught with particularly like a one or two phishing attempts and that. And that in itself really helps raise awareness, albeit not the way you want it raising, to be honest, but helps raise awareness. Because I think, like a lot of things, people just generally think it's going to be something that happens to somebody else, and it's not. It's kind of, when is it going to happen to you, and it's kind of, and how you're going to respond to it, really. And I think if you take that approach, none of it being perfect in any means by that, but at least if you're looking. You look at it from that angle, really, you're more prepared for it, and your staff are more prepared what to do in the circumstances. Again, not got to repeat some of it, but it is about empowering staff and bringing them along and having that open door, really. So not just really your sort of technical staff understanding the technical aspects of it, but understanding it from the user end as well. Because a lot of the time, things that crop up or risks materialise simply because there's had to be a workaround or something because of maybe a policy or a process or something that's internal. We've found that in the past. So by working with end users and by engaging with end users, you kind of make the technology and, if you like, the security wrap around it appropriate for what they need and appropriate essentially for that particular asset or that service.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. Yeah, thank you for your input. We really appreciate it. That kind of prevention is better than cure kind of approach is certainly the way forward. So thanks for that, Dave. Really appreciate your time. And I'll hand back over to Tamworth.
Thank you so much, guys. And yeah, thank you very much for joining on, Dave. That was really insightful. So we're going straight back into another poll. So which of these statements is the most effective for engagement? So we've got a couple of different statements there, and you're just voting for which you feel would be most effective in your particular organization. So again, I will leave you for about 30 seconds or so to go through and get your votes in, and then we'll discuss them afterwards. Cool. So yeah, we'll end that poll there. And it seems like the majority of people have gone with 80% of your colleagues have completed their training for this month. Join them in making our organization a safer place to work. And in second place, we've got the complete your training on time and you'll be in with a chance of winning a £50 Amazon gift card. And we've also got a vote for complete your training or you will lose out on your bonus. So I think the interesting thing to note here is that there isn't really a right or wrong answer in this case, because every organization is completely different. Naturally, the one that the majority of you have voted for incorporates an element of social proof. And so by saying 80% of your colleagues have completed their training, join them. What you're kind of inherently doing is effectively giving the rest of those employees a bit of a fear of missing out kind of trait, where effectively they'll feel like, oh no, everyone else has done it, so I need to do it. And yeah, that does tend to be a very powerful psychological method. As well as that, for the Amazon gift card, that's a different psychological principle called need and greed, which is effectively the fact that everyone's a little bit out for themselves effectively. And by giving them an opportunity to get a gift card, you're playing on that psychological principle. And again, it's quite interesting actually that a lot of the things that the attackers might use in a phishing scenario, a sense of urgency, a sense of social proof, a sense of need and greed, are actually the same things that we can use to improve our engagement on the learning side. And so you can see there the majority of you have actually voted for the one that incorporates the most powerful technique, which is social proof. Neil, is there anything else that you'd like to add from this?
No, I think you've summed it up really well, and you know, a a good culture is to understand that obviously you've got to have a positive culture. So generally social proof tends to be the most effective generically, as a good start point for everybody. Incentives are good. They do work, but they have an efficacy to them, so they tend to wear off after a period of time. But if you're after something really specific to happen for something very, very important, it can be a very, very powerful thing. Bonuses can create a little bit of a cultural problem outside of the training. So just be very wary of them. I have seen them be used very, very powerfully at a large FTSE 100 mobile phone operating company. They couldn't get their top end sales execs, you know, we're talking 250, 300 grand a year people, to do any training. But as soon as they linked it to bonus, they were the ones that actually then did the training. So depending on your audience, and that's the same with everything with awareness and training, is to get a picture of your audiences and understand what motivates them is really important. It can be effective. But yeah, social proof is, and Tamwa, I'm sure you're going to go through it on phishing, is 3 times more powerful than any other tool in this instance to get people to engage in training.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. So yeah, as we move into simulated phishing then. So simulated phishing is very much the biggest driver in a reduction of phishing rate. So if you want to reduce the amount of emails that people are clicking on, the amount of suspicious emails that people are clicking on, simulated phishing is by far and away the biggest driver for a reduction in that. However, on the flip side, as you can see there, it's also the biggest driver for employee disgruntlement. So a lot of the time, people will send out simulated phishing and basically attempt and go for the highest possible click rate at any given moment, and do the most complicated things possible. And what that ends up with is your employees turning around and going, actually, why are you trying to trick me out here? What benefit is this really having as a whole? Whereas we kind of want the opposite when it comes to building a culture of honesty and positivity. And as Dave alluded to earlier, it's about keeping that communication open and honest as well. So those employees should understand, first of all, why, which we've spoke about a great deal. And then the communications should always be positive rather than punitive. And some of the other things that we also incorporate when it comes to phishing is starting off with easier templates that people are less likely to click on and more likely to report, so that they get used to that reporting process. And just by always remaining open and honest, giving them the understanding of, okay, we delivered this simulation, we know it was complicated, but here's why. You know, whether you've had emails come into your spam filters that look like that and you wanted to address that particular style of email, or, you know, there's many things you can do to just make sure that your employees are in the loop and understand, rather than feeling like they're trying to be caught out. And what you'll find is that your support inquiries for your IT teams will drop drastically. And as Neil alluded to on the previous slide, this kind of positive approach and honest approach will increase that efficacy by up to 3 times. But Neil, I don't know if there's anything further you want to add just on the delivery side.
I think it's just when I've done presentation on this before, the first question is usually around, is it counterproductive to tell people that you're going to do phishing simulations, because then they're expecting it. But if it becomes a long-term goal, that you're making it clear that simulations are going to be done for a long period of time, that and it's about exposure to those genuine looking risks, it will reduce the risk for them on an individual basis. Then people tend to engage with them a lot better. And it's the same with any type of training. I'm from a law enforcement background, so I used to run the personal safety training program for the police, handcuff and baton training, and you'd get people punching pads, and then in a real life situation outside of a controlled environment, which was the gym, you throw in somebody actually trying to punch them before they have to defend themselves, those techniques went out the window. So the actual key point was actually doing scenario-based training to get them used to the trigger points, what are their awareness, etc. It's the same with anything, scenario-based training and real-life training, or as realistic as possible, will always allow people to make decisions for themselves, and they have control over it, which means they are then more likely to, and most importantly, more likely to report something in future, which is the key metric for phishing. Yes, click rate is incredibly important and you want to lower it because it looks good, but your best metric for phishing is how many people are reporting suspicious stuff, and it's as simple as that. And that's where I honed in on what Dave said earlier, is there is no silly question, is report something. And the IT team actually being really positive about that approach and how they respond to it. You know, if it is a little bit of a silly question, not to tell the person, you know, you should know this. It's about engaging with them at all times.
Awesome. And yeah, great point. I just want to add on the giving your employees an understanding that you're doing the phishing campaigns. Yes, that makes them more suspicious, but in reality, that is what we want to achieve. And by increasing suspicion, we also reduce that overall phishing rate, and we also increase the number of reports that come through, because that is the key driver at the end of the day. So, as Neil alluded to there, the next step is to understand the importance of the reporting mechanisms. So phishing campaigns are not only about negative actions. So a lot of people will focus purely on who's clicked, who's entered data, who's downloaded a particular attachment, when in fact, the positive actions are the more important ones when it comes to developing a culture around cybersecurity. So the positive actions here are that we want to educate the employee. We want to encourage the use of a streamlined reporting process. And we also want to empower individuals to communicate about cybersecurity by championing those who do. So what we'll see a lot of the time, especially from companies who are quite new to phishing simulations, is that you can see in the example there, someone on Slack has shared, has anyone else received this email? So that it starts a discussion around a simulated phishing exercise. Now, a lot of organizations at face value will look at that and think, that's just completely ruined my metrics. Nothing's going to be correct anymore, etc., etc. That's the instinctive thought. However, it's actually the opposite. And these are the types of behaviors that we want to champion, because if there is a real incident where a phishing email comes in to multiple people, the first thing you want that person to do is to talk about it and to ensure that line of communication is as open as possible. And so it's these types of behaviors that we really want to embed within organizations when we talk about cybersecurity cultures. In addition to this, so again, a lot of organizations, one of the other pitfalls is that because of things like this, they'll try and make it even more complicated by sending everyone a completely different template, for instance, so that they're all individualized. However, again, you just end up in a bit of a negative kind of scenario where people don't actually communicate. And the main thing that we want to encourage here is that line of communication as a whole, not just from your company, not just from your employees to your IT teams in terms of that reporting process, but also your employees talking to each other, whether it's on Slack, whether it's on Teams or any other messaging platform, so that everyone gains a greater understanding of what made this particular email a phishing email. So we move on to the next poll, which is, which of these statements is the most effective when responding to a reported phishing email? So you've got a couple of examples there of things you could do or say once an email has been reported to you, let's say in this case you're the IT team, what would you say in response? So I'm going to give you, again, another 20 to 30 seconds to just get your votes in, and then we'll discuss. Right, so thank you for all your votes. And you can see from the results that just by saying thank you by reporting this email, you've made our organization a safer place to work. That's clearly resonated with the majority of people here. And then we've got 1 vote for we will investigate the email you've reported and be in touch as soon as possible. So those 2 are really the 2 most important responses on here. And ideally, actually, we would want to use a combination of the 2 to not only thank the end user and show that they've made the organization a safe place to work, but also that we're going to act on it. And by giving them that understanding that you're going to act on it, it can again have a really powerful effect on how many people end up reporting emails over time. Neil, I don't know if you have anything further you'd like to add.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier about storytelling approach being important, and people forget facts and figures, but I seem to remember my facts and figures. I delivered over 6 million phishing simulations across government departments, so I've got a good test base for this. And thank you is the most important thing. If you don't thank them, only 50% of people will then report the second time because you haven't shown common courtesy, and that is a human trait. People like to be thanked. And the drop-off rate after that is only 95% of people won't report a phishing email after the 3rd attempt of not being thanked, which again, so we're talking about cultural shift and little tweaks that you can make to your communication being so important for getting the right behavior. And if you get the right behavior, it changes your culture. Has to go in that order. Awareness, behavior, culture is really important. And the bottom option is the big no. I don't vendor bash on here, but I know, having used multiple vendors in the past in my previous life, the bottom one is a very, very common recommended email that a lot of organizations send out. And the simple thing is, if you distinguish between real life and simulations, so when you launch a campaign, you tell them that you're doing simulations as part of your plan to reduce phishing. But after you've done that, you treat every single email with your staff and every single simulation as real life, because otherwise it creates a second layer. And the layer will be somebody sees something suspicious in their inbox. You want the first instinct to be, is this suspicious or not? If it's suspicious, I report it. That is the only thing that you need. Keep it simple. If you add in, last time I reported it was a simulation email, you'll create another layer, which will be, is this a phishing simulation or not? And then it just changes whether people actually will bother reporting it or not. So treat everything as if it's real life after you've done your initial comms.
And so that ties us in quite nicely to our 6 kind of top tips when it comes to your reporting process. So the first thing is to make sure it's clear, simple, and convenient, and ideally through multiple channels. So if there is a way, you could implement the ability to forward the email on, or use a particular reporting button, or both options, or even send it via, a screenshot via a messaging application. Having multiple channels and making it as easy and simple as possible is really important for making sure that users will continue to use that process. There also needs to be a procedure so that the users have confidence that the email that they're reporting will be acted upon. And that's kind of what I touched on with the previous answer, where we will investigate and be in touch as soon as possible, just by adding a little bit of, well, we are actually going to look at this and it is going to be acted upon. It can make a massive difference, once again, in terms of that. You also need to have some kind of quick feedback mechanism. So the previous poll was the feedback in the quick mechanism with that thank you message. And as Neil said, it's really important to make sure that you actually thank them and have that common courtesy. And because you're giving them the feedback, the thank you, and giving them the understanding that actually what they're doing by reporting isn't being a burden on your IT team, but actually is helping keep your organization secure. By using those 2 points in conjunction, you can maximize your effectiveness with just your messaging. And that's a really easy thing to implement. You also need to obviously avoid blaming the user in any way. So for instance, if you get an end user who submitted some data somewhere that they shouldn't, or they clicked on something that they shouldn't have, or installed something that they shouldn't have, if they come out and then report that and say, I messed up, I accidentally clicked on this thing, I'm not sure if it was legitimate or not, the first instinct shouldn't be to blame that user. It should be to empower that user and saying, actually, you've done the right thing by speaking to us. Because what you get if you do start building this almost blame culture is that people will still engage in those behaviors, but they just won't tell you about it. So it's really important to ensure that you avoid blaming the user and actually empower them to speak about mistakes that they might have made. And then point 6 is just as Neil said on the previous slide. So do not inform the user that the email received as a simulated exercise, and treat it just as if it was any other suspicious email. And again, the reason we want to do that is just so that you don't create those 2 separate schools of thought within someone's mind, and they don't start creating multiple layers of, is it simulated? Is it real? Is it not suspicious at all? Because the more complicated you make this process, the less people are going to use it. And that's just human nature at the end of the day. So then we move on to assessing your progress. Obviously, we talked about, it's quite a while ago now, but about the implementation plan and trying to approach specific risks and weaknesses within your organization. And one of the most important aspects is to reassess your organization regularly, whether that's yearly. That's what we do with most of our clients, but it could be yearly, it could be quarterly, it could be every couple of months. However you would like to do it, just make sure it's regular and consistent. And the really important thing here is to make sure that you ensure that those metrics and risk profiling aspects are carried out in the exact same manner. So you're getting the same statistics from the same places, so that they are cross-comparable year on year. And also make sure that you involve key stakeholders in your results. So it might be, your board level will want to see and demonstrate the return on investment. The management teams might want to see how effective they've been, and the IT teams and the communications teams might need to figure out how best we then go and communicate these results to the wider organization. And the importance of that is to show that actually to your entire organization, what you're doing is having an impact, and the behaviors that every single employee is engaging in has been improving over the last several months or over the last year. And so by doing that, we can obviously demonstrate improvements, and we can also figure out what the next set of risks will be. Obviously, sometimes you'll see improvement, sometimes you'll see stagnation, sometimes you'll see things have regressed a little bit, and it's about ensuring that you follow the continual process and develop that new implementation plan based on results. If you haven't improved in certain areas, maybe you'll approach those topics again using a different methodology. But at least it gives you that consistent basis to continue improving over time. So from our own human vulnerability assessment, so this is, I think, over 390 organizations and just over 40,000 respondents for year on year with our Bob's Culture product. We found that password sharing was reduced by 39%. This is after 1 year. And we had a 48% increase in confidence handling sensitive information online. We had a 29% decrease in phishing email opened rates, a 45% increase in users following cybersecurity procedures, and then a 50% increase in confidence in users' ability to spot phishing emails. So these are the types of things that we want to measure every single year to really show that actually we're continually reducing the amount of passwords shared. We're continually reducing the amount of people who click on links from unknown sources. And we want to increase people's confidence. So it just gives you a good example of what we're effectively trying to achieve every single year. So to summarize the keys to culture change, the first one really is around patience, and culture change takes time, and sometimes quite a lot of time. There will be hurdles and lots of struggles that you need to overcome. You can use licensed products such as the ones that we offer or the ones that other providers offer, and that will help you save time. But it's worth noting that every company's needs differ, and there's no solution that just works for everyone all the time. And so you have to, as I said, make sure you involve your employees, make sure you involve your board level, your middle management. If everyone's involved throughout the process, you'll find that this process will speed up over time. But you do have to remain patient, and you might not get it right first time as well, and understanding that as well. And by showing progress, so by following the process to culture change, you're going to show progress. You're going to be able to show quantifiable metrics that will show that progress to your board members and maintain buy-in from their point of view. You'll be able to maintain buy-in from your employees' point of view as well, by showing them what progress they have made. And then you also have to understand that the journey is never really complete, because at the end of the day, mistakes are a part of human nature, and building these positive habits and behaviors is one thing, but actually maintaining them is another, because it's really easy to start using these positive habits, checking your emails consistently, making sure they've not come from suspicious sources. But if you're no longer seeing any training because you're considered perfect, then you will slowly but surely start to slip back into older habits and older behaviors, as we all do sometimes. And it's also worth saying that the risk of a breach is always evolving. The email templates we see, especially with phishing, is they're getting more and more complicated. They're getting more and more like the real thing. And as such, we, when it comes to education, also need to evolve in line with that. Neil, I don't know if there's anything further you'd like to add.
I think you've surmised it very well, Tammy.
Thank you. So yeah, that is pretty much it. I'd obviously like to thank you all for listening and joining us today. And I will hand back to Neil.
Yeah, thank you. I know we've gone a little bit over on schedule, but we are still open to some Q&A. So if there's any questions of Tamoy as lead for the presentation, or myself, or even Dave, I'd like to open the floor up.
I guess the way to do that is to click on the activities button, which is the bottom right hand corner of your screen, and then Q&A, and you should be able to submit a question.
So while we're waiting on that, I'll ask Tamoy a question. What do you feel about the number one topic that you see come out on across your clients as the biggest risk? What are the top three?
So the number one in every scenario typically that we've seen, and it's very rare that this isn't the number one risk, would be phishing. And it's both because of the perception of phishing and the perception that people have towards phishing. I think it's inherently something that worries people both in their work lives and their personal lives, and something that they probably experience more in their personal lives than their work lives. And so a lot of the time, that kind of fear of phishing makes people effectively, a bit more scared of it, and a bit more at risk as well, because they don't really know at what point, they don't really know what the right things are to look out for at any given moment. And because they're always changing, and because phishing is consistently changing, templates are getting more complicated, as I alluded to. We've got new types, smishing via SMS, phishing via calls, QR code phishing recently. Because there's so many different types, so many different things to look out for, it's the ever-changing number one. And oddly enough, I feel like in second place really is social media. And a lot of people not understanding that, for instance, you shouldn't be leaving your social media profiles completely open. You shouldn't take photos at work that might have, a whiteboard with a client list in the background, or, things like that people don't often think about, and they'll just do, tend to be the ones that crop up as the top risks. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And we've got some questions. Alec, do you want to read them out?
So we have one from Jenny. She asks, are there any specific approaches or top tips to successfully embedding cybersecurity in a home working environment? Often controls are harder to monitor and communication in office is less.
Yeah, so I feel as though I completely agree, to be honest. It is really difficult in a home working environment, especially because, you've not got all of the easy access to people that you would in an office, where you could arguably just walk around and have a conversation. When it comes to home working, I think the general tips are pretty much the same. It's just the way you deliver it might be a little bit different. For instance, when we talk about championing behaviors, those behaviors are the same. So whether I turn around to the person to my left and say, look at this email, looks a bit dodgy, or whether I take a screenshot of that and send it via Microsoft Teams, the end result is the same, but the method by which I'm engaging in that behavior is different. So we do have an entire kind of module like focused around home working specifically and the risks with home working. But I would say, as long as you follow the same principles as we've outlined here, you will end up with the same end result. Your methodology might be slightly different, but you should still end up with the same result, really. But yeah, Neil, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
It's basic housekeeping with a lot of this. The number one risk for home workers when it comes to human related risks is distraction. So that comes down to housekeeping. Where is your office? Where are you working from? What distraction you've got around you? And so there's that personal accountability for how you manage that in the home. I'm a father of 3. They come in from school, very, very difficult to not be distracted by them knocking on the door, asking for something. So it's that management of that situation, but the risks are ultimately the same, other than obviously we saw the shift when everybody suddenly got a laptop and was asked to work from home, and all of a sudden those technical risks that, you know, fall on the CTOs and those that are working with the technology, but generates around distraction, which is the biggest problem at the minute. I hope that's a good enough answer for you, Jenny. Oh, you've raised your hand, so please ask.
As well, that reply is coming in. We'll tackle another question. This one from Sean. Thank you, Sean. After thanking users who have reported a phishing email, should we then provide feedback if the user has received an email as part of a phishing simulation campaign?
I'm happy to answer that, Tamoy. The biggest problem with that is resource and actually the amount of time it takes to investigate things. But if you have got the right processes in place to check, 100%, if you can resource given an update on what has been reported, it is an incredibly powerful thing. It's the classic, somebody's performed an action for you, and if you thank them and then they'd like to know the outcome, you are more likely to have them report in future. So 100%, if you can, give them feedback.
Great, thanks, Neil. One from Matthew. When a user reports clicking links and entering credentials, the initial IT reaction is to freak out and stress out the user. This may lead to the user not reporting in the future. How can you get IT teams to react appropriately in the future?
So this fits for me, and Tamoy, you might have a different answer because Tamoy's a techie. I'm the soft skills kind of guy, so I don't do techie stuff. This is around, so awareness isn't just around end user and cyber. A cultural change and behavioral change has to be an organizational thing. So it's educating those in those roles that if people are reporting things, that we don't have that kind of negative approach to things. So you have to really consider about what language is being used and what is ultimately the action that you're asking people to do. So if people are investing their time in it, there are going to be instances where something happens and it may be significant, and there may be ramifications for people if they've gone outside of policy and things like that. That has to be managed, admittedly, but ultimately we have to try and put a positive spin on things in order for us to for people to report in future. Tamwa?
Yeah, for me it's about education and educating your IT team that their reaction does have an impact on the rest of the organization. And so if they react in a calm and understanding manner, even if they're kind of freaking out between them, that's completely fine. But as long as they're reacting in a very calm and an understanding manner to the end user, whether that's via email, whether that's over a meeting, understanding that they can have a significant impact just by doing that is probably the way to go, and also showing them the impact of that as well. And obviously in the instances where, you know, they take that initial reaction and they do freak out and stress out the user, those are the moments where you can use them as learning moments and say, actually, guys, come on, you need to make sure that whilst it might be a big deal to us, if we make it a big deal to them, they're not going to report it in the future, and that's going to be a problem. So yeah, it's just about educating those individuals in your IT teams, and you can almost script these things out so that, you know, if there is an incident, this is what you should say effectively. So have some documents, some templates, things like that they can use, and that's probably the best way and the easiest approach.
Great answer, thank you. A couple of questions from Graham. We'll do these one at a time. The first one is, can we give some rough timelines for when you can see the benefits of the cybersecurity awareness campaign being noticed? For example, 3, 6 months. And are there any easier or harder sectors to work with?
In terms of timelines for benefits, this can kind of vary wildly from organization to organization. I showed some statistics there earlier on in the slides, which were focused around increasing user confidence and all those percentages. That was done over a 12-month period and on average across many, many different organizations. But what we find is that the majority of organizations will show a significant improvement within a year. And then there are some organizations where actually it might take 2 years before we see a significant improvement across the board. And then there are some organizations where they might start delivering and 3 or 4 months in, they're getting very used to it. And it can also depend on organization size. The larger your organization is, the more difficult it is to continually push out messaging and ensure that people are partaking in the process, partaking in the learning, seeing communications. All of those things get amplified the larger the size of the organization. So for smaller organizations, we see that it tends to happen a bit quicker, and then for larger ones, it takes a bit longer. And in terms of sectors, I don't think there's any sectors that are easier or harder in and of themselves. It can just depend completely on the organization, what processes you've got and things like that. But Neil, I'm sure you have further insight.
Again, that last question is dependent, and it seems like a little bit of a cop-out. But again, sectors that particularly have a technical knowledge, and generally most of our customers fall into those sectors because they're more regulated and they're aware of the problem. But so the cursor knowledge comes into play, and one of the key things that we measure as part of our vulnerability assessment is actually people's overconfidence in dealing with an issue and a cyber threat. So I always hark on to my government days that the IT department were very negative around the initial phishing simulation phases that HMRC did in 2015, saying that they've got better knowledge than everybody. And interestingly enough, when we did phishing simulations over a period of time, their mean average was actually higher than every other department in government, because they felt that they could spot things better. So there was an overconfidence in their ability to spot phishing emails. So Tamil does a lot of work on that with vulnerability assessment. So harder in the sense of buying, and harder in the sense that some and not all of those companies in that sector are like that, but you do get people who have an overconfidence.
Great answers. And the final question from Graham is it better to start cultural change with IT and then move to end users, or vice versa?
I'm going to give that classic cop-out answer. It depends on the circumstances. What I would suggest is, obviously, when you're looking to do your baseline tests, whether it's knowledge tests, confidence tests, we do a number of different things. Tamil talks about the key 3 areas that we're looking to assess very early on. the sectors that you target are usually based upon the results of that kind of initial baseline and that risk profiling. So that's where that key focus is. I would always say that you can't, if you create a culture change in a department and then create different cultures of cyber in different departments, it makes it very difficult to create an organizational culture. And I see a lot of vendors in the space, they say, buy our product and we will create a cybersecurity culture for you. You can't create an effective cybersecurity culture for an organization. You can make cybersecurity a big part of the organization's already existing culture. And that is the huge difference between the way in which you should approach things. It is, what is the culture of the organization and how can I make this seamless integration of cyber being part of it by doing all the things that we've talked about today. But don't try and create a separate one, because you might have some very early results, but it will fall away very, very quickly. Tamara, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add is just, that's not to say you couldn't, test a few, for instance, providers, get a few free trials and things like that, just to see what that would be like with a particular department or a particular team or a particular just group. Maybe you grab middle management, the managers of each department, and see how they fare with specific providers, specific e-learning. And it's fine to do stuff like that. And those kind of focus group things I would probably do into departments, so that you don't get just the IT team's opinion and that's it. You kind of need the opinion from someone who represents each kind of department within your organization. So I would probably go down that route if you feel like you want to kind of start small and expand. But yeah, for the most part, in terms of what we'd recommend, I would definitely say 100% wholeheartedly, it's better to do it for everyone and get everyone on the same journey than it is to try and sort out kind of a mini journey for each individual, because as Neil said, the cybersecurity element has to be a part of your overarching culture. It's not kind of its own thing.